Are you struggling for consistency in your sim racing? Does your iRating look like a roller coaster? If so, we have good news for you. The way to get more consistent is to first understand what you're doing differently than the professionals. And VRS is the answer. With our competitive subscription, you will have the telemetry, setups, tutorials, and everything else you need to fully analyze your driving. Our data packs and the ability to compare your driving with the best in the world will show you exactly where to adjust your inputs, change your driving line, and shave seconds off of your lap times. And our powerful and precise Direct Force Pro wheelbase and precision pedals are being used by some of the world's best drivers. All these champions agree that VRS hardware is not just the best on the market, it's also priced well below the competition. So if you're looking to upgrade to direct drive and the best pedals in sim racing, VRS is your answer. If you want to get better, get faster, and make it happen sooner rather than later, you owe it to yourself to find out why so many people are switching to VRS. You'll be so glad that you did. Visit www.virtualracingschool.com and learn why the best use VRS.
Well, hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Apex Racing TV, and welcome back to the Evolution Sim Racing GT3 Championship. This is round number 6 of the season, coming to you tonight from the Red Bull Ring. My name is Ron Mullins. Alongside me in the commentary booth is Aaron Smith, and in the virtual production hall we have our old buddy Joshua Wilkie. Tonight we're off the back of another 1-hour race, heading into another one of those duo of 30-minute long races, and we're doing it at the Red Bull Ring. This track has always been one that I have a little bit of a soft spot for. I remember as a kid driving full distance races around this track back on F1 2014. I'm not sure about it, but it's just a track that I love for some reason. Can't really pin the tail on a donkey to figure out as to why that is the case. Maybe just a chemical imbalance in my brain. So Aaron, with that being said, am I alone in that regard or no?
I mean, we discussed it 30 seconds before we went live, but I mean, you were racing it on F1 2014, I was racing it on a game that's 10 years older than that. I was playing on my original Xbox, racing around this track on F1 Career Challenge, which is F1 9902 for consoles. No idea why they changed the name, but that's EA Sports for you. But I also have a very soft spot for this track, and I remember even as a kid, when I heard that this track was coming back to the F1 calendar, I was like 9. Even I was hyped. And I think this track lives up to the hype. I'd say it's always good for racing. There's not too many dull races that go on here, even in F1. Shock, I know. And GT3 is one of the first layouts I ever raced around in sim racing. I think it was Race Room. They did like a free weekend where all the content was just available for everyone, and did some GT3s around here on that game, and I did quite like Race Room actually. I mean, most of us have probably played it at some point. Bit of a shame the content is quite expensive, but yeah, I absolutely adore this track. It's one I have a very, very soft spot for, but I wouldn't say it's one of my favourites, oddly. But I do have I just like it, but it's not one of my favorite.
Yeah, it's one of those tracks where I don't think it's anyone's real favorite or like standout star, but it's just one that it's a good track to say the very least. It's got some nice qualities to it, which lends itself to some pretty good racing. Still has a little bit of an old school kick as well, despite the fact it's got some pretty expansive asphalt runoff areas, and track limits are usually a big factor. I remember the F1 race back in 2023 where they had 2.5 minutes of time penalties issued a day after the race. So it's a track that, despite the fact that it has been updated for sure, it's still one that holds a very soft spot in a lot of people's minds, us two on this broadcast being no exception. And it's also a pretty historic track as well. You know, it used to host Formula One it still hosts Formula One. Hosted Formula One back when it was called the Österreich Ring, and the track kind of looks similar to what it does today, albeit looked a bit more bloated than it does now. The track kind of ran a little bit wider. The old layout was definitely a very fast one, and sadly, as a person living in the city of Philadelphia, it should be noted that one of our best from the state of Pennsylvania, Mark Donahue, ended up passing away after a crash in a practice session for a Formula One race here back in the day, coming out of turn number 1 on the old circuit. And that's part of the reason why they put in a chicane layout there that was used up until the last race at the Österreich Ring. Then this track layout that we have today really came to be, and it's been a pretty good one for racing. It was originally called the A1 Ring, now it's become the Red Bull Ring, and there's actually some photos online of how this track used to look like in its abandoned state. Aaron, I'm not sure if you've seen any of those photos. If not, I'll probably have to send some in the in-race chat that we have here in the broadcast booth. But pretty interesting looking at a photo of such a modern racing facility in a state like that. Very similar to like seeing old photos of Indianapolis, for instance, back when it was abandoned during World War II, but a track with a whole lot of history baked into it and still a pretty fun layout.
I have not seen the pictures of when it was abandoned. I mainly just remember this layout. I as a kid, I didn't even know that this track used to exist. I think it was 20 years before we eventually came to this layout. And the old Österreich Ring was interesting, to say the least. There was literally no low-speed corners at all. It was just, you turn right. There was like 2 left-handers, and that was it. I think it's fairly similar nowadays, actually. But this track is just a little evolution of the Österreich Ring. It's just more modernized, you know, more sensible, actually raceable, for example. Whereas the old layout, it required some heavy balls and a lot of trust within the car. This track, a lot lower speed, nowhere near as dangerous. But I still quite like the Red Bull Ring. I wonder what the story was behind Red Bull just thinking, yeah, we're just going to buy this track now. It's ours. I mean, Red Bull do some crazy, just mental things, I'm sure most of you are aware. But it just straight up just buying a track, it is a bit mad. I think a lot of you would agree. I mean, buying a track is not cheap. But then again, I don't think Red Bull are skimping for money.
Yeah, so at a time like this, despite the fact that Aaron and myself are very big history buffs in the world of racing, kind of, Aaron, you're more focused on the Formula One side of things. I just know a whole lot about, I say a whole lot, I just know like a blanket amount of historical information about most racing series out there, which is a very good reason why I have very few friends, that is for darn sure. But looking at everyone's true source for historical knowledge, the Wikipedia article for the Red Bull Ring, what happened was back in 2004, the track was sold to the late Dietrich Mateschitz, who was the owner of that track from 2004, I guess, up until his death about a year ago. So I guess it's now just in possession of Red Bull as a corporation. But that was around about the same time where the track was in a really rough state. They demolished the pit buildings and the grandstands, which, if we're being completely honest, were a little bit out of date when the track was first brought back to life back in the 90s when it briefly became the A1 Ring, which is a very odd name to say the very least. I feel like, Aaron, you'll be able to back me up on this as a Brit. Isn't there like, actually no, I believe there's actually an American product. I was thinking of HP sauce for a second. But we got some A1 steak sauce here in this country. So whenever I think of the A1 Ring, for some reason I think of that, even though A1 was probably like some sort of like Austrian or Swiss tech business. I'll have to do some research into that as well to figure out how they came up with the name A1 Ring. But actually, I just found it's a mobile phone provider from back in the 90s, which is really saying something. But this track just has a whole lot of history to it, and just running around this track and seeing it in the state that it is now, especially whenever Formula One is running here, and just seeing the rabid turnout with the fans in the grandstands, it feels like a race in the U.S. It feels like It just has that sort of energy of a big American sporting event, despite the fact that, I mean, it's held in a country that starts with the letter A, but pretty much Austria and America have little to nothing in common with each other. But nevertheless, this track, it's just, it has such a good vibe to it as well. I can't really figure it out, but this track just has a good little aura around it. That's so fun to race around as well. You got those heavy braking zones, especially heading down into, I guess it would be turn number 3 since they count that small little meandering left-handed kink as a corner nowadays. But still, this track is a whole lot of fun, and I think with the 2 30-minute races that we have to look forward to later on today, Aaron, we may be in for some pretty good racing as well.
Yeah, definitely. And these GT3 cars so far this season have been very, very entertaining in terms of racing, no matter what track we've gone to, really. Even some of the more boring ones, shall we say, Indy Road and Barcelona, cough, cough. And even those races were still pretty good. So I'm expecting big, big things today from our huge, huge grid. I believe it's it's over 40 drivers. I think it's the smallest grid we've had so far this season, 43. Usually we get near the 50s, but 43 cars around this teeny tiny track is still a lot. It is one of the smaller full Grand Prix layouts on the entire Formula One calendar. I think it's one of the only tracks that Formula One cars have nearly gotten a sub 1 minute. I think the only other track to do that was the very strange Bahrain layout that they used in 2020. But apart from that, I think these guys were doing about 1 minute 2s at one point when those F1 cars in like 2018, 2020 were just nuts. But these GT3 cars, not quite as fast as a Formula One car, as you can clearly tell. They're going about nearly 30 seconds slower than those Formula One cars. And unsurprisingly, it's going to provide better racing though. As we ride on board briefly with Ashley Brooks, and like Ron said, weirdly they count this left-handed kink as a corner now. Very harsh braking, very easy to lock a front tyre in any other car. Luckily these GT3s have ABS, don't need to worry about that at all. Traction out of turn 3, oh so important for this long run down here. Usually would be a DRS zone, not in these GT3s. Again, harsh on the brakes, it's downhill this time. Again, super easy to lock the front right tyre through there. Again, not a thing these GT3 guys have to worry about. All the way to the right of the track and cut back inside. You want to avoid that curb on the inside ideally, but these GT3 cars can get away with it. Be using track limits pretty much the same time. Oh, big snap there for Ashley Brooks. And as much as we would have liked to have finished the lap, well, Brooks is going to have a damaged ego after that one.
Oh, Aaron, you clearly do not have a lot of experience with live track guides. The amount of times that I've had that happen, and Josh can attest to this because I think he's been on the air for some of these, trying to do a lap guide around a racetrack during a practice or qualifying session, a driver ends up pinning it on that lap. It's like, and okay, they go off the track, let's try and find someone else, and just try to figure out what car to ride on board with after that. But that's a very tough section, probably one of the hardest corners around this racetrack as well. Just so bearings headed through right now. That was turn number 7, which is such a tricky corner to try and get right. Many drivers have gone off on that corner in real life. I'm sure in the sim it is going to be the exact same case in the action that we have coming for you tonight here on Apex Racing TV. Riding on board with bearings, he headed his way through the turn number 9 and 10 section. That section, in terms of the corners themselves, it's a little bit tricky, but I think the main thing to worry about heading through that section, Aaron, I feel like since you're more of a driver, more of a sim racer than I am, you could probably attest to this, is mainly the track limits heading through that section. That may be the reason why I enjoyed it playing on F1 2014 as a kid, mainly because I had penalties off and I didn't have to worry about track limits too much, but that section is just oh so tricky, especially in these GT3 race cars, trying to keep it on the racing surface and try not to pick up a slowdown.
Yeah, the slowdown coming out of turn 10 is super tricky to avoid, and if you're trying to do a full push qualifying lap, it's so easy to get the off track and then the slowdown, which completely messes you up for your next lap, which is just an absolute brain. You get the idea. It's very difficult to get a qualifying lap round here. Probably one of the most tricky on the entire iRacing service. Purely, like you said, just those off tracks are brutal round here, and the high-speed nature of that final section, it just means you have to push the car to the absolute limit. It's kind of, you either back out, go a bit safe through that section, but lose, 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5/10 just because you have to go so slow to avoid the track limits, or you full push it, risk getting the off track, and you're either going to get pole or you're not going to set a lap at all, and you'll be all the way down in 43rd place. So it's going to be difficult, but I think that qualifying session is going to be very important. Track position is, I'd say, again, another important factor around here, and even more so since we've got those 2 30-minute races. No pit stops this time around, just pure sprint racing energy all the way until the end. So that qualifying session could be the make or break for some drivers. But I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some of the top guys, maybe even like Lucchesi, Dennebrega, Otins, Van Gortel, some other guys as well, Bearings, Brandet, Brooks, whoever. They're usually the quickest drivers in their own category. They could end up starting last if they're not careful.
Yeah, we've seen incidents like that in the past thus far this season. Of course, now with round 6 of 10, we're officially into the halfway mark of this season. Not halfway through the races, though. We've got 16 of them, and this is going to be the 8th race of the season. 8th and 9th, I should say. So I guess after the first of 2 30-minute long races, that will officially be the halfway mark here from the ESR GT3 Championship, season number 6. And what a season it has been thus far. We've been to some fantastic racetracks. Le Mans, Indianapolis. Well, I guess, Aaron, you probably wouldn't call that a very fantastic racetrack. At least the road course, you wouldn't call it one. Barcelona, Interlagos, and Montreal 1 week ago. It's been a pretty compelling season thus far. We've had many winners, especially in some of the higher up classes. Despite it being the one where you'd probably expect a bit more consistency, the elite category has been a little bit tricky to try and manage. We've had Tristan Dennebrega, Luke Lucchesi, the 2 RDSA esports teammates win. Also saw Ruben Bearings win at the second race at Indianapolis. Dennebrega, I believe, has the most wins thus far this season. However, he hasn't won since the first race at Interlagos a couple of weeks ago, as it was Stefano Gattuso winning race 2 there, and Andrew Fairley in a squeaker trying to get that car to the checkered flag with some heroic fuel saving, taking the checkered flag 1 week ago at Montreal. That's been a pretty good class to follow all throughout this season, and you can see it in terms of the championship point standing. Tristan Dennebrega leads it over his teammate Luke Lucchesi. Those 2 cars still covered by only 2 points. We're expecting a big swing of momentum considering how things happened at that Montreal race 1 week ago, with the double points on offer as well, considering that it is one of those 1 hour long races. But Dennebrega is still leading it after Luke Lucchesi really got struck by a falling anvil towards the end of that race. Ended up finishing 7th compared to Dennebrega's 3rd. That's part of the reason why that championship fight is close. Ryan Odins is currently 3rd at the moment in the elite standing. Sean Brainback and Daniel Lee running at your top 5. I'm curious as to whether or not Daniel Lee, who we had a chat with after the Montreal race, is with us today. I'm trying to look through to see if he is out there on the racetrack. I believe he is in the 271 car. However, didn't show a whole lot of pace in the practice session earlier, trying to see where exactly he was. I believe he was inside the top 10, albeit just barely. But Daniel Lee's been a fantastic driver to follow ever since he joined this series at Barcelona a couple of weeks ago. He's finished 2nd, 4th, 2nd, and 5th. We'll have to see how things shake out here at the Red Bull Ring. However, Daniel Lee may be one of those drivers that we have to keep our eyes on in the elite category, Aaron.
Yeah, 100%. He's not actually been here too many times from what I can see, but when he is absolutely rapid. Even in that hunk of junk Mercedes that he's for some reason driving, that I have a lot of respect for that man, trying to get that thing round a racetrack. And well, clearly it's not suited to this Red Bull Ring circuit at all. He had a bit of hope the last week when we spoke to him that maybe here he'd have a bit more speed, and of course we'll see his true speed in this qualifying session if he can avoid those tricky off tracks as we ride on board with Brayton back. Let's hope we can actually stick with him this whole lap this time. Coming through turn 7, you have to be patient on the throttle there, wash out too much, and that off track on the outside will eat you up and swallow you and spit you back out again. As we come now to turn 8 and then turn 9, wide entry, flick the car in, just getting on the edge of the track and avoiding that off track and even slow down on the outside at turn 10 across the line for his first flying lap. Was it valid? It was. It's a 1:30.5. Not the quickest that we've seen. I think the guys were doing about 1:29 in the practice session. But of course, just a first lap to get warmed up. And this next lap should be a lot quicker.
And gotta get those tires into the right operating window. I've done enough Radical SR10 broadcasts around this track, and I've driven that Radical SR10 around this racetrack enough to know that if you're running on cold tires in any sort of race car around this racetrack, you're in for a world of hurt, as we just saw Ashley Brooks skidding through the middle sector off into turn number 7. Brooks has had a pretty good season thus far. They've won the most amount of races in that Evo category. However, they've run into some difficulties over the past few weeks. He's off the back of 2 finishes and 2 races, which really left a little bit to be desired. Kicked the season off in dominant fashion with wins at Le Mans and the 2 races at Indianapolis. Barcelona, on the other hand, didn't really go to plan with an incident earlier on in that race. Interlagos race 1 was a little bit of a rebound. However, off the back of 2 straight races where they have not won in the Evo category, instead Francois Brendet has been winning it in the Evo class. That's part of the reason why that championship fight has closed up a little bit. We were pretty much already assuming that Ashley Brooks was going to be the champion in the Evo class. However, Brooks running into some difficulties, running into a little bit of a mid-season swamp throughout the past few races. So Ashley Brooks looking to try and turn things around. He enters this race still with that Evo championship lead in that number 19 MRC 493 McLaren. Looking to try and turn things around here at the Red Bull Ring. That'd be a pretty good track to do it as well, especially so considering the fact that despite it's been a little bit of luck to give Francois Brendet some of those victories in the Evo category, a little bit of controversy as well after an incident at the Montreal race 1 week ago. Francois Brendet has turned on the Hyperjets in that Evo category, as he's currently on the provisional pole in that class, about 0.8 of a second in front of Robin O'Brien in P2, who's also running in a Porsche. So Francois Brendet really showing a lot of pace in the Evo category. Looks like it's going to be a dogfight between Brendet and Brooks for that Evo championship.
I think it's slowly dawning on me that I think that Porsche is just absolutely ridiculous this season. I haven't really seen another car come close to it, to be honest. I mean, I guess you could say the McLaren occasionally, but I mean, my God, that Porsche just in the hands of most drivers just seems to hustle its way around a racetrack better than most other GT3s can at the moment. And, you know, sometimes you get some tracks where maybe the Ferrari's close, maybe the McLaren's close, maybe you get a BMW that's there. But the Porsche, the consistency that that car has shown so far this season is just insane. And it's definitely been the Porsche Cup this time in the last season of 2024. And I think it's more or less been the same across IMSA and the VRS GT3 Championship, as that's Porsche definitely looks like an absolute weapon at the moment. It just seems more comfortable than most other cars. It can handle that higher speed grip a lot better. And like some drivers were talking about last week, the traction that it has coming out of a lot of corners is just insane compared to especially cars like the BMW and the Mercedes. It can just blast its way out of a corner purely because it just has so much weight over those rear tires. It can just go like a Formula 1 car, basically. Compared to the BMW, the Merc, and some other cars, which have a lot of weight over the front, understeer central, and then trying to accelerate out of a corner where you just have a banana peel on the track and you may as well not bother. Whereas the Porsche can run fairly low traction control, and then out of corners like turn 3, turn 1, and turn 4 as well, it just shoots off and there's no catching it.
It's a very good time to bring up that phrase that he said a couple of moments ago, Aaron, mentioning how some of these drivers, it seems like they're just slipping on banana peels all throughout this season. Very fitting that we look at the somewhat banana yellow looking Porsche of Luc Van Gortel. He's currently on the pole in the Evo category, and he brings up a very good point in terms of how comfortable that Porsche is looking, especially at a racetrack like this. Currently, of the 3 classes, all 3 of our class pole sitters are in Porsches, and really the only sort of standout you can really say Actually, I say that in the Evo category of the front three in that class, 2 of them are Porsches. In the Premier category of the front 3, 2 of them are Porsches. The Elite category, on the other hand, all 3 of them are Porsches. Luke Van Gortel in this 226 MJK Sim Racing Porsche. Currently on the provisional pole, Luke Lucchesi, the reigning 2-time reigning series champion. He's currently right behind in second, only separated by 100th of a second between those 2 drivers in that elite category. So it's looking very close at the moment. Oh boy, between all of those drivers, even Barrick's Bearings and another Porsche currently slotted in 3rd at the moment. Tristan Dennebrega in 4th in a McLaren. The McLaren, I think, is probably one of the most popular cars in this series, but off the back of Montreal 1 week ago, where the McLarens didn't really seem like they had the pace advantage over that Porsche, I feel like as this season has progressed, that McLaren has slowly become a bit less competitive, as we see Luke Lucchesi run mega wide coming out of the corner, possibly getting his lap time invalidated in the process. So it looks like he is not going to be able to challenge Luke Van Gortel for that pole in the elite category. But getting back to the point that I mentioned a couple of moments ago, Aaron, I feel like that McLaren is slowly becoming a bit less competitive as this season goes on. Maybe iRacing is starting to BOP that car just a teeny tiny bit.
I could just say as well that it could just be down to the different tracks we're going to, and who knows. Oh, that's a very close to the slowdown for Paul Collishaw as he comes across the line. That probably was not a valid lap time from him, as Dennebrega slots himself into 3rd. As Ryan Otins as well made his way past Ruben Bearings. So now it's pretty much the top 2 in the Elite and Evo class that's Porsche dominant. And in the Premier class, something as well that we should mention about the Premier class, some of you might be wondering, why is it below the Evo? Well, that's because Brandet has decided this week that he's going to turn up as he did, he has done it the past few weeks, to be fair. He got that 1 win, I think, 2 weeks ago, and it's just completely turned his season around. He's kind of gained that momentum that he needed. Had a good round last week at Montreal, but a bit iffy in terms of driving standards, but still managed to come away with the win regardless, and is currently on pole in Evo, and actually quicker than the pole man in Premier. So that's why you're seeing it above the likes of Bearings, and that's Collishaw going for a spin in the Lamborghini, which was good last week, but like it has been so often this season, is kind of back to normal.
Yeah, a little bit spotty is that Lamborghini. I believe it is going to get an upgrade in iRacing in the next couple of seasons, but you didn't hear that from anyone else outside of me. But nevertheless, Lamborghini is still also one of the best-sounding cars in the world of iRacing, if we're being real as well. That V10 just always sounds so good. Very nice to see that V10 out there. I believe it is one of the only V10s, for the simple sake that not a whole lot of people choosing to run the Audi, which is a little bit surprising, honestly. The Audi, that was just updated, I think, only a couple of seasons ago. It was back last year that Audi got a brand new lick of paint put on it. But there's only 2 Audis running in the field at the moment. Elias de Vries in the 213 Audi, running in that elite category. Then you have to go to Danny Weir in the 55 Audi, running in the Evo class. So only 2 Audis out there on the racetrack compared to a whole lot of Lamborghini, well, a decent amount of Lamborghinis and a whole lot of Porsches and McLarens. That Porsche and McLaren seeming to be the most popular picks, but one driver running in the Porsche is a driver that you mentioned not terribly long ago there, Aaron. Talking about Francois Brandet and the fact that he has completely turned around his season with this string of victories that he's in the midst of right now. He could really break his season into 2 halves at this point. In the first 3 races, he finished 6th, 3rd, and 6th, respectively. Didn't even race in the 4th round of the championship at Barcelona. However, in the last 3, he has finished 2nd, 1st, and 1st. And Francois Brandet is definitely on a little bit of a hot streak at the moment in the Evo standings. That could be part of the reason, as that gap has decreased between Brooks and Brandet. Those 2 kind of breaking away from everybody else. Robin O'Brown dropping back a little bit with some pretty rough stretch of races started the season off with 3 straight second-place finishes. However, finishes of 14th, 9th, and 4th in class kind of derailed that a little bit, got back on the podium 1 week ago. However, we're going to have to see if that Kaizen GP2 Porsche is going to be able to rebound. And touching on one more championship storyline that we haven't really talked about thus far on this broadcast, Aaron, that being the Premier standings. This has been a season of dominance, shall we say, with some of the drivers that are running at the front. Matt Hoyland is off the back of a DNF 1 week ago. However, outside of that, he was on track for 4 straight victories, got 3 anyways, has 4 victories on the board at the moment, 311 points scored at this point in the season, and he's doing it unlike the other drivers in the other classes. He's running in a BMW, which is not a very popular choice in any of the classes that we have. Looking through, trying to see how many BMWs that we have on the grid at the moment. Counting Hoyland as one,
2.
Joe Sparra as another one. Yeah, only 2 BMWs. So the fact that Hoyland has been as competitive as he has been in the GT3 Premier category, running in that unpopular BMW, is pretty damn impressive as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I agree. I just think the front engine cars this season just haven't been good enough, to be honest. The Mercedes and the BMW both have been a bit of a boat, but clearly Hoyland just saying no to that fact and is getting on fairly well with it. Of course, could have had 4 wins in a row, but just got a bit unlucky last time out at Montreal. But honestly, just looking through the entire field, it's mainly Porsches and McLarens. There's not really much else. You've got a few Lamborghinis, but most of them are towards the back because that car is just, yeah. You've got that one Audi De Vries, like we mentioned, and Danny Weir as well. So 2 Audis, 3 Mercs, 2 Ferraris, and I think that's it. I don't think I'm missing anyone out. I think there's a Corvette that we've had a couple times this season, but I think that driver hasn't turned up today.
That you are correct, Aaron. We have seen Malcolm Coates in that Corvette run in the past this season, but outside of that, haven't seen anyone else running in that Corvette. Gotta say, though, just having a whole bunch of GT3 race cars to really pick from is awesome to see as well. I think this qualifying session is just about over. Gonna get that starting grid load up for you in just a couple of moments. Time for what's set to be a very intriguing race 1 here at the Red Bull Ring. Got a slightly mixed up grid, some drivers who we haven't seen grab poles in the past, and we also have the 2 RDSA esports drivers of Luke Lucchesi and Tristan Dennebrega looking to try and battle hard. But it's going to be the Dutchman Luke van Gortel starting this race from the pole. The South African of Luke Lucchesi going to join him on the front row. Then Tristan Dennebrega, his RDSA esports teammate, going to start right behind in 3rd. Ryan Odens starting this race in 4th for Alpha 1 Esports. Ruben Behrings going to be starting in 5th. Luke King in 6th. Stefano Gattuso, who already has a victory thus far this season, is going to be starting this race in the 7th position. Dean Powell going to be starting in the 222 car in 8th. Looking through the rest of the drivers inside of the top 20, running at the top 10 is going to be our row 5 sitters. Trying to get the right number in my head right now. Oh, pardon me, folks. The final driver starting in the top 10. I will tell you, it's Francois Brandet and Bert Behrings. And a small little issue, just had to apply a little bit of WD-40 to those graphics. Of course, Apex Racing TV is not sponsored or affiliated in any way, shape, or form with the corporation that makes WD-40. But Francois Brandet, the Evo driver, going to be starting this race in 9th, in front of the premier pole sitter of Bert Behrings. Starting this race in 11th is going to be Darren Sharples. Jean Brainback going to be starting alongside in 12th. Elias De Vries, one of the only drivers in the Audi, going to be starting in P13 overall. Daniel Lee with a somewhat disappointing qualifying result. He's been very fast and very consistent thus far this season, and a patient driver as well. Let's see how things shake out here. He's going to be starting a little bit farther back than we usually see him. Matt Hoyland, the championship leader in the Premier category, going to be starting in P15 overall. Robin Noel Brown going to start alongside him in 16th. Then rounding out our top 20 is going to be Thomas Pugh starting in 17th. Ashley Brooks trying to turn his season around in the 18th position and try and hold on to that Evo championship lead through the final half of this season. Chris Jennings in 19th. Nick Stube going to round out your overall top 20.
And it's Paul Collislaw in 21st. We saw him struggling throughout the entire qualifying session. He's definitely not liking that Lamborghini at all. Jeffrey Darman in 22nd place. Joe Glass 23rd. Joe Sparrow in 24th place. Robbie McKee in 25th. Martin Koch in 26th. Marcel Breitenbach 27th. Kostrick in 28th. Turf Kruger in 29th. Victor Van Ziest in 30th place. Jonathan Provost 31st. Preston in 32nd, Sarek Deslesser in 33rd, Keenan 34th, Bostock in 35th, Sean Clark in 36th place, Ludbrook 37th, Gareth Newton in 38th, James Pallow 39th, Danny Weir in 40th place, and then your last few drivers, Andrew Fairley in 41st, another driver who's not really liking that Lamborghini today, Alex Fretwell 42nd, Stefan Donnelly 43rd, and Dennis Collar rounding out your 44 car grid. And shock, all those cars that haven't set a time, I think 3 out of 4 of them were in Lamborghinis. So there you go.
That is a very intriguing storyline that we're going to have to follow all throughout the rest of this race meeting here at the Red Bull Ring. Seeming like that Lamborghini just does not like this racetrack at all. However, it seems like those Porsches certainly are liking this race surface, considering that both of the drivers starting on the front row are going to be doing it in a Porsche. So, Aaron, heading into this first race, do you think a Porsche is going to be the one to beat, or do you think a driver in a McLaren is going to try and usurp that?
I think purely the fact that it's a 30-minute race, I think it will just be the Porsche dominance once again. I think maybe if we had an hour race here, I would say we'd have some other opportunities, since the Porsche can be a bit harsh on fuel and its tyres, but they don't have to worry about that at all in this race. They can just gun it to the line.
I'll have to see who is going to be victorious in the first of 2 races that we have to look forward to tonight here on Apex Racing TV. Here at the Red Bull Ring, 10 corners in all, 2 30-minute races in front of us, and this is going to be a whole lot of fun. Reminder, the green flag is usually a little bit of a spot of contention. Looks like it's going to be yet again, as most of the field is already gunning, and usually they have to wait for the green flag to come at, then hit the start-finish line before they can gun it, but the green flag already at, the driver's gunning it well before the start. Another bit of a start sham from this series. We'll touch on that a little bit later on. I'll have to vent my frustration seeing yet another botched start in this series. Looking at the field, though, heading through turn number 1, most of them going to negotiate it cleanly with that killer yellow sausage curb on the outside. You usually expect these drivers to be a bit in a spot of trouble at the very beginning of these races, but look like most of the field is clean. The pole sitter of Luc Van Gortel getting off to a flyer. Certainly a jump start of the century, but hey, there's no one in here to monitor these drivers race control wise, so Luc Van Gortel playing the smart game, realizing if no one's going to penalize him, he may as well just gonna completely ignore the race idea that these drivers have from the start.
Well, I mean, in my iRacing brain, you know, I'm like, what he did is completely normal. That's what most drivers in an official session would probably do. But, of course, I think you, like you said, you have to wait for the green and then go. I mean, the rules are somewhat confusing, but...
It's actually the start-finish line they need to hit.
Oh, then there you go.
Not even the green, yeah.
Ooh, that's ever so slightly wide, as that's a Porsche going for a spin at turn 7, and that definitely looked like contact. You do not spin there naturally, usually. And carefully coming back onto the track is Victor Van Ziest, as he's fallen all the way to the back of the field. And that's looked like a very frustrating first few corners for the Dutchman. And we'll get a quick look at what actually happened with him, going side by side with one of the GP2 McLarens, and it looks like it's going to be a tap from the Lambo behind. Ooh, send him spinning.
Yeah, that was a tap for sure. Not sure who that was in the Lamborghini right behind Victor Van Ziest to send him around, but nevertheless, that's going to cost him out on a teeny tiny bit of time. Tough to have that sort of thing happen to you at the very beginning of these races, especially considering that even though this track pretty good to try and overtake at, if you end up in a spin like that, you're going to careen your way down the running order. Just sadly looks like Victor Van Ziest is going to fall victim to that very early on in this first race of the evening. Looking at that fight, though, a little bit farther in the back. Some drivers going for a spin. That's Robin Old Brown coming out of turn number 4. So Robin Noel Brown spinning from second in the Evo category. That is going to be a heartbreaker for the driver of that Porsche involved in the championship fight in the Evo class, and I think he had some assistance, possibly from Hoyland, spinning him around coming out of the tight hairpin of turn 4, which is such a good overtaking opportunity. But as we've seen in the past, Alex Albon back in 2020 kind of springs to mind in terms of mistakes that can happen through there, costing a driver a whole lot of time. And there's actually a big crash there right after that. 2 McLarens caught up in that mess with not Robin O'Brien spinning around and actually, I believe, towing back to the pits. That already just blinked out of existence from my end. But taking a look at that replay, wasn't even any sort of assistance at all. Robin O'Brien just trying to get that move done, overcooking it a teeny tiny bit. And you can see that crash with 2 McLarens coming together, coming out of the corner. I'm not sure who that was coming out of it in a Porsche that had to take some evasive action, but some messy stuff coming out for him.
Yeah, very, very messy. And like you said, I don't think there was too much contact there at all, as Francois Brandet now trying to be overtaken by, I think that's Danny Lee, and has been overtaken. Of course, not for position, but just in terms of overall position, and that just means less points for Francois. But still leading the Evo class by a long, long way already, nearly 5 seconds, and that just goes to show how good of a qualifying session he had in that Porsche. As De Vries, one of the only few Audis in this entire series, making his way past a Porsche. And I think that's Brett Bearings there in the leading Premier category as De Vries makes his way. He's in 11th in his category, but overall is in 12th. And literally only has Francois Brandet, who's in another class ahead of him, as he's got Brayton back in front. As we'd just like to apologise, as I believe iRacing has just crashed for our producer, and well, thank you, iRacing. We do apologize for any inconvenience, but we will try and give our best description of what's going on. Just pretend you're listening to Radio 3 on the M25 or something, as De Vries is still in 11th place currently, just sitting behind the Porsche of Brayton back. Got no changes in terms of position on this lap so far, as it looks like Brett Bearings is going to be under pressure from one of the McLarens. Didn't go for a move that time. And yeah, everything is settling down, so don't worry, you're not missing out on too much, folks, but we're trying to get things sorted out as quick as we can.
Yeah, still going to try and call this race ARTV Radio here on Apex Racing TV tonight. I guess it would be ARR Apex Racing Radio at that point, but nevertheless, going to try and keep up with the action as we try and get those technical issues resolved. As it stands, though, currently Luke Van Gortel still leading this race over Luke Lucchesi. Those two drivers covered by barely any air at this point in time, so we may see a fight develop between those drivers in the not-too-distant future. Lucchesi right in front of his teammate of Tristan Dennebrega. So Dennebrega, despite the fact he's running in that McLaren, still trying to wheel that thing around the racetrack. Ryan Odens as well in a Ferrari. He's been able to wheel that 264 Ferrari quite well all throughout the season, running in the 4th position as it stands at the moment. As much as we've really been focusing on the Porsches and the McLarens, the Ferrari shouldn't be scoffed at either. There's only 2 of them in the field, that being the one of Ryan Odens and Stefano Gattuso. Gattuso already has a win thus far this season. Owens has shown some winning potential, currently running 4th and 6th respectively. But I think even though we've mentioned those Porsches a lot throughout the season, those Ferraris really shouldn't be scoffed either.
Yeah, it's a very differing car choice at the moment. As it must be mentioned as well, Danny Lee has had an amazing start. Somehow in his Mercedes, he's gone from 14th up to 9th. He's had an amazing start to this race. Your top 5, though, is still as we were on the first lap. Still Van Gortel, Lucchesi, Dennebrega, Otens, and Bearings covering your top 5 currently. As Lucchesi does look like he's hustling that Porsche and is really gaining on the back of Van Gortel. We could potentially see a move within the next few laps for the lead of this race. Dennebrega's not too far behind as well, and Van Gortel might have some quick quali pace, but just seems he might be lacking ever so slightly in that race pace, and is definitely coming under pressure from the two drivers behind who are desperately trying to finish ahead of one another for that championship. 2 points separating Lucchesi and Tenebrega. And Lucchesi, of course, after last week's just blunder in his pit stop, getting that speeding penalty, spending 40 extra seconds in that pit box. And that really did cost him the race. He fell down to 12th after that. I think he was fighting close for the lead of the race. But here we are. We're finally back as iRacing has gotten itself back together. And we ride with Daniel Lee, who, like I said, has had a pretty good start to this race. But he's kind of just in no man's land now. He's got Dean Powell in front of him, his teammate, who has definitely been the better of the two Mercs this time round here at the Red Bull Ring, as Daniel Lee usually is the leading car between those two, but this time Dean Powell's had a pretty good time of it so far, running in 8th place, and is right on the back of Luke King and Stefan Gattuso for potentially what looks like to be 6th place.
Yeah, so despite the fact he's having to lump around that absolute unit of a Mercedes, which, Aaron, I forget the choice of words you used to describe that McLaren and not the McLaren, the Mercedes earlier on throughout this broadcast. What was it again? You described it as a block of lead, if I remember correctly. What was the phraseology? Do you remember what he said in reference to it?
I don't even remember, but I mean, you can describe it as a block of anything, a block of cheese, a block of flats. Anything, to be honest. It just doesn't. Tungsten. Yeah, it doesn't do the turn. It would be very well suited for Americans. I actually think, yeah, it's probably the car on this entire grid which I would say is the most American. If the Ford was here and the Corvette, then that would be the obvious choice. But we don't. We just have the European choice of cars, the good choice of cars. But the Mercedes is probably the most American. Big hunk of a V8 at the front and doesn't corner very well. So
still got that V8 motor. That's what it's got. It's got that V8 motor in it, so that thing is going to be a beast down the straightaways. But around this racetrack, you got to be good through the corners as well, despite the fact it is a very fast racetrack. When you're going flat out around this racetrack, which is really a question of when, you're not around this racetrack going flat out throughout most of it. Still got some corners to deal with, and in that Merc, you're going to be in for a world of trouble. But it looks like they're wheeling that Mercedes quite well at this point, running 8th and 9th in the Evo, the Elite category, my apologies, as it stands at the moment. It's got that V8 motor in it, though, so I feel like I gotta do like a stereotypical American accent. I'm not sure how I could add to the accent that I already have, but nevertheless, I think we start doing that and start doing accents, we may get in trouble here on Apex Racing TV, me trying to do an American accent. I'm American, so I guess I can make fun of my own kind and say that we are a big fan of V8s. Tenebrega getting a move done on his teammate Luke Lucchesi coming out of turn number 1. That's fairly locked steady between those two drivers, so Tenebrega in that RDSA Esports 270 McLaren getting a move done on his RDSA 224 Porsche-driven teammate. So that's going to be for P2 in the Elite category, and despite the fact that their teammates, it's going to be hunky-dory whenever it comes time for a post-race interview, you can tell that tension is starting to run a little bit high between those two drivers. They have been battling hard all throughout this season. They haven't come to blows yet. However, with how hard they've been battling, I would not be shocked at all if we end up having a moment like that. There are some very fast drivers. They're the ones contending for the championship, and at this point in time, it's getting to crunch point here, Aaron. So Tenebrega and Lucchesi, as long as they are around the same part of the racetrack battling for position, I think we're always going to bring up that little awkward debate about teammates maybe coming to blows and teammates being involved in a heavy championship fight.
Well, they've been a very good match for each other so far this season, and it's been very, very entertaining. They haven't actually really gone wheel to wheel that much, as we're watching Kostrick around the outside of turn 6. That's a brave one, but can't quite hang on to that position, just has to give it up once again to, this is Kostrick, I believe, defending from Martin Kork at the moment, and a very, very good battle between these two, and they're keeping it very, very clean. It's always what you want to see as we jump on board with Ashley Brooks, who is currently running in 2nd place, definitely not too shabby considering he's had a bit of an iffy past few rounds. And honestly, I think he'd take a P2 at this point, as Kostrick and Robbie McKee still going wheels to wheel heading into turn 1. And Kostrick just getting a little bit loose on the exit. And it's allowing the guys behind. I mean, this is a huge chunk of cars all fighting for the same bit of tarmac. And I'm just noticing the Clarkson stickers on the back of Robbie McKee's car. I'm absolutely loving that livery as he once again tries to get past Kostrick. It's proving very, very difficult for him, but got amazing traction out of turn 3. And as long as he doesn't mess up his braking down into turn 4, which is very easy to do, as that's Cock going for a very, very late dive bomb up the inside. And got it done. Very, very good move, as Robbie McKee had an absolutely awful time on the exit of turn 4. And now is under pressure from Martin Cock himself round the outside of turn 6. Not too much grip on the outside. It's very difficult to get an overtake done, very much favouring the inside. And just about holding on to the place is Robin McKee, but again, just couldn't quite get the speed on the exit. And Martin Cock up into 6th place and ahead of Robbie McKee as well. As Robbie McKee again side by side with Kostrick into these last few corners. They bang doors as the cars behind as well going wheel to wheel. That's awfully close with the Porsche, and that's one of the McLarens who, I thought he was in the wall there. Jonathan Provost, very, very close to contact there with the Porsche in front of him. This is getting very, very close and very, very hairy. 15 minutes into this race, as they're all just trying to fight one another, and that's a biggie.
It comes to blows.
That's a big one, and there it is. The inevitable happened. The Porsche into the wall. Both McLarens there getting slight bits of damage, and they were very lucky not to have a bigger incident. But Turf Crewer, unfortunately, big impact into the wall, and on a straight as well, and that's when it's embarrassing as a racing driver. Crashing on a straight is just never a good thing.
Well, with how hard they're battling, though, Aaron, it was going to happen at some point. I think Martin Cock is very happy that he got away from that, because it was a game of chicken, and he could see that. Look at the evasive action from Jonathan Provost. I don't even think he got a dent on his race car. Really, the one driver that turns out worse for the wear as a result of all that was really Roland Turfgroyer. You can see him in that MJK Sim Racing blue number 20 car in that Evo category, going for a spin. Tank slapper into the wall, and I think he's going to hit the outside wall here as well, or just barely taps it. Either way, some significant damage on that Porsche, so it was going to happen at some point, though, Aaron. With how hard they were battling, something was going to break eventually, and looks like that was the one that ends up breaking. Some suspension brakes as a result of all that. But looking at some brakes, about to last late breakers hang down into turn number 3. Side by side is Luke King and Danny Lee, looking at who's going to prevail in this fight between these drivers. One in a Mercedes, one in a Porsche, and you also got the teammate to lead, that being Powell in another Mercedes right behind. So Luke King finding himself in the midst of a Merc sandwich heading down into turn number 4, trying to fight back on the outside line. Will he be able to get the move done back on Daniel Lee to slip his way back up into 7th in class, or is it going to be a losing fight? They were nearly 3 wide heading down into turn number 6 a couple of moments ago. It's Powerhouse Corner, and this is a powerhouse fight with some very fast drivers in this series. They get away with it at the moment, and even with all of that, they still haven't lost touch with Stefano Gattuso right in front of them. So I think this may turn into a 4-car fight in the not-too-distant future, as Dean Powell tries to get a move done, trying to go for it, and nearly making contact with King, heading down into Jochen Rick's bend of turn number 9. Dean Powell, he is feeling really, really racy, looking to try and join his teammate in that position, trying to move his way up into 8th and shuffle back that Porsche of King back down another position. But that, I mean, the fighting that we're seeing, really the stuff that you expect heading to a racetrack like this, despite the fact that stop-starty may not be a driver's ultimate favorite racetrack, it puts on some fantastic racing. We just saw that got put on full display in that elite class fight.
Very, very close stuff there, as Dean Powell looks like he could potentially be eyeing up a move on Luke King within the next few laps. And I'd just like to mention as well, Daniel Lee, how I don't understand how this man is doing this in that just Mercedes, as we've been talking about it, and well, quite frankly, we've been bullying this car throughout this entire season. He's been matching the leaders over the last 2 laps. I was so confused. He was like 8.3 seconds behind the leaders a few laps ago, and it was about 3 seconds off Dean Power and Luke King, and all of a sudden just caught up to them and has gained 2 seconds on the leaders. I don't know how he's done that in that Mercedes, but fair play, as his James Pallow up the inside there of John Ludbrook. A bit of bullying, pushing him off the track there, but eventually managed to get himself up into 9th. I don't think Ludbrook is very happy with that. Actually, no, it's one of the other drivers complaining about a blue flag, I believe. But John Ludbrook, yeah, I don't think many drivers enjoy being pushed off the track, and that was indeed very mean from James Pallow, but bullied him off the track and gained the place as Lucchesi looking up the inside of his teammate Denner Brager, and they're very clearly being a bit timid with each other. They do not want to crash into each other. That is the last thing they want to do. And maybe if Lucchesi just had been a bit braver there, he could have gotten past his teammate, but just played it safe and let Denner Brager go. And you definitely feel that as teammates. You know, you want to go wheel to, or you want to go racing, but you know what will happen if it goes wrong. You know the explosive arguments that will happen if something goes wrong, and they're both very much being careful with each other, as they both know they've got a championship to fight for, and a very important one at that. Lucchesi defending his championship, and Denner Brager trying to gain one over his teammate. And don't count out Otins and Bearings as well. They're still here, but I have the feeling that all 4 of these cars are kind of being held up by Van Gortel. Admittedly, his last lap was actually pretty quick, but apart from that, Van Gortel has struggled a tiny bit for pace so far in this race, but seems to be hustling along nicely now. In these last few laps, he has picked it up a tad bit, as Daniel Lee, again, I'm sorry I keep mentioning him, but he's been utterly brilliant in this first race so far. He's up 8 places from where he started, and again, it is matching the leaders in terms of pace, and it's just insane what he's managing to do in that Mercedes, considering these guys are in, you know, light, nimble, mid-engine cars, and he's in that thing. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's managing to do it, and doing it very, very well.
He's wheeling around a chunk of lead as if it weighs less than a feather. This is a really good performance from him, and he's setting himself up quite well for race 2 as well. Because of that top 12 invert, he would find himself pretty much losing no positions at all, so that's a pretty good position to be in. If you are Daniel Lee, take a look at the move that he pulled to take that 6th position from Stefano Gattuso around the outside through turn number 3, gets that move done, having the better exit. That's the thing with battles around this racetrack. If you can place your competitor in a bad spot, you can just take that position and start to run away with it. And really, we just saw that get put on full display with the move that Daniel Lee put on his adversary of Stefano Gattuso, just enjoying that exit speed, being able to get on the gas early coming out of that corner and onto that back straightaway between 3 and 4. That's the main reason he got that move done. That's the main reason why he finds himself in the position he's in right now. He shouldn't take it easy though, because if he makes some sort of mistake or trips up slightly, he would find himself in a world of hurt, dropping down behind Gattuso, King, and a whole bunch of other drivers if he goes off the track in a really bad way. And, you know, speaking of that top 12 invert, the driver who's currently holding on to that inverse grid pole would actually be Brecht Bearings in the number 190 car. He's running in 12th at the moment, the leader in the Premier category. So he would grab the overall pole position, which would be a very good performance for him. Gotta say, I don't know what it is, Aaron, about the Bearings brothers, but whenever it's these 2 30-minute race format races, these drivers seem to do pretty good. Ruben Bearings already has a win this season, that coming in the doubleheader race at Indianapolis earlier on in the season. And Brecht Bearings also has a victory in the Premier category, that coming in another 2 30-minute long race format. So I think I don't know what it is. Maybe there's something in the water at these racetracks, but these drivers seem to kick on the hyperjets whenever we head to these races.
Yeah, which is rather unfortunate since these are the races that you probably don't want to be doing better in, as those 1 hour races give you double points. Those are the ones you want to be doing better in. Hence why I think Dennebrega probably actually happy with the way that his season has gone, as the only times he's had a bit of a difficult race is during those 30-minute races. Initially, we thought Dennebrega was out of it last week, but somehow had an amazing comeback. I think he was all the way down in about, I think it was 24th or maybe a bit higher than that at one point after that first lap incident, and ended up on the podium. So Dennebrega very much liking those 1 hour races, and this is what usually happens with Dennebrega as well. He does very well in the first 30-minute race and potentially wins it, and then the second 30-minute race something dramatically goes awful for him. So could his luck change this time round at the Red Bull Ring, and maybe he can finally start to extend his lead in the championship over Lucchesi, instead of it just permanently staying at 2 points until the end of time. But Dennebrega very much slowly gaining up to the back of Van Gorsel, and no one's really gone for a proper move on him so far this race. They've gotten close, but not really had the opportunity to actually go for it. As the problem, especially with Dennebrega, is Van Gorsel's in a Porsche, and we know how good it is at accelerating out of those corners. And it's going to be something that's going to work against Dennebrega. That's very wide there from Van Gorsel. That's not going to be helping him at all onto this front straight. You can see how much time that's given Dennebrega. Is he going to fake a move to the inside? He does a little bit, but just into turn one, it's not that good of an overtaking opportunity, as there's just not really enough room on the inside, not really enough space to outbrake your opponent. But however, down into turn three is a lot better of a chance. He's getting closer. He is close. He pulls to the inside, late on the brakes for Dennebrega. This is the first time we've really seen anyone go for a move on your race leader. But once again, not close enough. And that Porsche accelerating like a rocket out of turn three, as Dennebrega now potentially might be under pressure from Lucchesi, as he looks up the inside again into turn four, very late on the brakes, just manages to get it stopped. But again, Van Gorsel accelerating out of that corner, super quick, but Dennebrega has the inside line. They're banging doors, huge contacts as Lucchesi touches the rear bumper of Van Gorsel. Had to back out of that one. That could have been huge if he kept his foot in. But Dennebrega, the first man to break the duck and get into the lead of this race. Can he now run away with it? With only 5 minutes left to go in this race, and can Van Gorsel fight back, or will it just be a surviving last few laps in that second place spot?
Snap the head off the geese. He put it in his pocket and he's trying to run away, but he's got a massive pack behind him looking to try and battle hard. Look at this with Gortel and Lucchesi. Gortel, little bit of a block, nearly running Lucchesi off into the pit wall, heading down the start finish straightaway, off into turn number one. Aaron, you mentioned moves into turn number one are usually ill-fated because you end up in a position that Lucchesi finds himself in now. He's now at risk of losing P3. He may lose out on P3 with Ryan Odens on his outside. And look at Ruben Bearings bearing down on Lucchesi. They're side by side, heading through turn number three. Is it going to be Lucchesi or is it going to be Odens grabbing that final podium position? Are these drivers going to come to blows? That is a real question. They're battling hard. They're racing hard. They're seeing that checker flag approach in the not-too-distant future, and they are breaking the elbows out. We saw that with Dennebrega and Van Gortel. We're seeing it right now with Odens and Lucchesi. Lucchesi nearly running Odens off into the dirt coming out of the corner. Looks like those two drivers briefly go single file. They finally single file out, heading down into turn number 6. But Lucchesi feeling the burn, feeling the pain. That's the thing with going for a move into turn number 1. As much as it may feel good in the moment, you're just going to set yourself up for an absolute disaster heading down into turn number 3, and that's part of the reason why that gap between the pack of Dennebrega and Van Gortel has grown massively between those two cars running in the lead of this race and the pack of Lucchesi, Odens, and Bearings. That gap has increased now to about 0.7 of a second. It's closing up a little bit through the middle sector, and with the drift, that's certainly going to help close that fight up. But Lucchesi proving that even if you feel confident in your chances, heading for a move into turn number 1 is usually ill-fated, And look at what happened for him. He tried to get a move for P2. He ended up nearly losing out on a podium position. So Lucchesi gonna have to try and take it a little bit smart next time by, as Francois Brandet's coming down pit lane from the dominant lead in the Evo category. He had about a 20-second gap, but now he's coming into the pits. A drive-through penalty for Francois Brandet. He was running solidly inside the top 20. Currently running 17th at the moment. I don't believe he'll actually lose out in the lead in the Evo category. Losing out a whole lot of time, though, so giving us a little bit of a jump scare. I mean, that's a good thing with being dominant in the early stages of this race. If something like that happens, like it just happened for Francois Brandet, you don't end up losing the lead in your class. But Francois Brandet giving us a little bit of a jump scare now with less than 2 minutes on the clock.
I mean, it'd be a bit weird considering that he's not really done too much this race in terms of actual off-tracks. I mean, it could have been maybe some early 4Xs in the early stages of the race that might have cost him. I'm not sure. But a lot of drivers going to be riding the limit of those incident points. And, well, this is the track that's going to punish you the most. And so you can see SDK's vague estimates of off-tracks for most drivers, and the problem with it is that we can't see how many off-tracks each driver actually has in iRacing, which is a bit of a shame. So it's just an educated guess as to how many off-tracks they have. And, well, they could have some other, loss of control, some 4Xs as well for tiny bits of contact. And we just don't know. But either way, Brandet, even with that drive-through, is still 9 seconds ahead of Ashley Brooks. Obviously, he's going to get less points than he would have liked, and can't close the gap to Ashley Brooks as much as he'd like. But either way, still leading in the Evo class, and that's all that's got to matter.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm not entirely sure how trustworthy that incident point estimate, there we go, try saying that 5 times fast. I'm not really sure how accurate that is based off the fact that in this series, if you hit 22 incident points, you automatically get disqualified, and if that was the case, a driver like Ryan Odens would have already hit that DQ limit a little while ago. So, not entirely sure if that is accurate, but nevertheless, Brandet having a little bit of a scare. He's still leading it in the Evo category. Ashley Brooks in P2. So those two continuing to prove themselves to be the dominant drivers in the Evo class from this season. And considering that we are coming up to the checkered flag of this first race in the not-too-distant future, actually already have hit that checkered flag. There's Shushin Denabrega winning it. Van Gortel ends up in second. Luke Lucchesi going to round out your podium in P3. But we're now officially halfway through this season, and Denabrega going to end off the first half as he started it with a victory. There's Matt Hoyland going back to victory lane in the Premier category, so he wins it in that BMW, continuing to prove that despite the fact that BMW not getting a whole lot of representation, with the only 2 BMWs being in that Premier category, they're still putting on a pretty good show. Gosh, say, not sure what happened to Brecht Bearings for him to lose out on the Premier lead, because he was leading it quite comfortably not terribly long ago. However, he ends up finishing second, about 8.7 seconds behind, so not entirely sure what may have gone on there towards the end of this race. But nevertheless, Hoyland going to end up winning it in the Premier category. Francois Brandet ends up winning it in the Evo class. And looking at the results, I believe the driver that inherits the reverse grid pole is actually going to be the Brit of Darren Sharples. So that's the first time we've seen him grab the pole for one of these races. It will be a reverse grid situation, but still pole is pole, and we're going to see him occupying the front row with our Premier winner of Matt Hoyland. Setting ourselves up for what is going to be a very entertaining race 2 off the back of what was a very hard-fought race 1.
Yeah, I am noticing some drivers having some really poor final laps. Luke King was one of them. He was 13 seconds off the pace on his last lap. Brecht Bearings as well, 11 seconds. So not sure what happened to those guys. Maybe they as well had a drive-through that we didn't manage to see. Or maybe they just had a slowdown or something. But Luke King and Brecht Bearings having their own issues, costing them big places. But we can take a quick look at the results, as we've got a few minutes of cool down now to just take a break, take a breather, and prepare yourself for another 30 minutes of hell as that invert top 12 is going to be very interesting, as we saw it just create utter chaos in Interlagos, and hopefully it will do the same today. But I imagine that Dennebreg is going to be over the moon with that victory. It looked a little bit unlikely at times, but 2 places ahead of his teammate. That's going to be some big points that hopefully he can convert it once again in this next race.
Yeah, those second races are so important. It's been one that's been really the trouble spot for a lot of those drivers, Tristan Dennebrega being one of them, getting struck by falling anvil after falling anvil. I'm going to go through, briefly run through my notes here to try and see how Dennebrega has done in those races, kind of to paint a picture as to how it's been for him. I believe in Indianapolis, race 1, for only the second race of many that we have from this season, he ended up being victorious in, well, actually, he wasn't victorious in the first race of the season. However, for the first race at Indianapolis, he ended up finishing P2 right behind his teammate of Luke Lucchesi. But despite the fact that those two finished P1 and P2, Lucchesi ended that second race in 3rd, while Dennebrega ended it down in 10th. So that really paints the picture as to how Dennebrega has done in those second races. But considering the championship situation he finds himself in, he does not want to have that happen to him at all. That would be a heartbreaker for him to deal with, especially at this point in the season where he's lock steady in that close championship fight. We'll briefly take a look at the results from that first race, and look at Dennebrega winning a first race here, and try and see where he ends up finishing in the second one. But there it is. There's the results for race 1. Dennebrega wins it. Luke Van Gortel in P2. Luke Lucchesi going to round out your podium in 3rd. Ryan Odins, Ruben Behrings, Daniel Lee, Stefano Gattuso, Dean Powell ends up in 8th. Then we have John Brainback and Elias de Vries rounding out your top 10, consisting entirely of elite drivers. You have to go to Hoyland in 11th, going to be starting this second race in P2 to find the first non-elite driver. Then you have to go all the way back to Brecht Behrings in 16th to find the next one. You can see the rest of the results right there. Some lots of drivers, I gotta say, overall for a track like this where you expect a little bit of attrition, didn't really see that, albeit mainly because we had a very disorganized start. Gotta say, if you're going to have a start format where you're telling these drivers to ignore how iRacing usually directs those starts, you should probably have live race control there. I mean, I've done some live race control in the past. I still do it for a series that has a non-iRacing standard start format. If you're going to do something like that, you just need to have some live race control there. But hey, that's above my pay grade. I'm just yapping at a bunch of pixels on a screen, so who am I to judge? Anyways, let's talk about this second race, which is set to be a dramatic one. Got that top 12 invert, which is going to give us a very intriguing storyline to follow all throughout this race. But I think the main one is just going to be the difference between Luke Lucchesi, the reigning 2-time champion here from the ESR GT3 Championship. We're going to see the difference between the Master and the Maestro, I guess would be the best way to describe it. You got the Master in Lucchesi, as I just mentioned, 2-time reigning champion, looking to try and go for his 3rd in a row. But he got the seasoned Maestro thus far of his teammate Tristan Dennebrega in that McLaren. He's been fast, however, in those second races, he has proved why he is not the champion of those two. He's proved why Luke Lucchesi has been able to get some championship crowns, because Lucchesi has been playing the patient game in these races. So I think heading into this race, officially kicking off the second half of this season, considering we have 16 races and now officially have 8 on the board, I'm curious as to whether or not it's going to be Dennebrega trying to prove us wrong here in the commentary booth and string together a clean and very well executed second race here from this series, or whether or not we're going to see that trend continue of Luke Lucchesi being the better performing of the RDSA esports duo.
Well, we've seen Dennebrega can come through the field cleanly. He did it last week at Montreal. It just seems he struggles to do it in these second races, and he will be starting from 12th. Not an ideal place to do it. He's going to be starting behind all the people who were challenging him for those podium and eventually race-winning spots. You know, the likes of Lucchesi, Van Gortel, some other drivers as well in there. We've seen, you know, Brecht Behrings be very good. Hoyland as well, who aren't starting too far behind. Gattuso, Brian Otins. He's got a lot of work to do, and it's raining.
Yes, it is raining. I completely neglected to mention the fact that there was a little bit of moisture in the forecast. Completely slipped my memory, but still, rain. That is going to throw a big wrench in the works for these drivers. That's going to be a whole lot of fun. I did not mean to intentionally withhold that information, but just completely slipped my memory here. Oh boy, but this is going to be a hell of a lot of fun now. Darren Sharple's going to be the one grabbing the pole. Matt Hoyland going to join him on the front row. Elias De Vries in third. John Brainback in fourth. Dean Powell in fifth. Stefano Gattuso going to be starting this race in sixth. Daniel Lee in P7. Ruben Bering's going to be starting this race in 8th, and looking right behind them, running at your top 10, is going to be the South African duo of Ryan Odens and Luke Lucchesi. Luke Van Gortel in 11th, and Tristan Denabrega in P12, looking to try and have a good second race for the first time this season. However, that's a lot easier said than done. Luke King going to be starting in 13th, Thomas Pugh right alongside him in the 14th position, Paul Collishaw in 15th after a pretty good race 1. Brecht Bering's going to be the highest starting of the second highest starting of the Premier Racers in 16th. Joe Sparra going to be starting this race in 17th. Francois Brandet going to be the highest starting Evo, looking to try and go 2 for 2 and continue that streak of wins that he finds himself in the midst of right now. Chris Jennings in 19th. Scott Korstick going to round out your top 20.
Wow, how are the other 20 drivers going to fare in this very different conditions? Rob McKee in 21st, Martin Koch in 22nd, Josh, thank you. A little bit too early from Josh there. Chris Keenan in 23rd.
WD-40.
Alex Fretwell, yeah, in 24th. Yeah, a little bit too early. The WD-40 coming in 25th. Andrew Fairley. Didn't even realise Andrew Fairley had a fairly good race in 25th, coming from last. Jonathan Provost in 26th. Victor Van Zies 27th, Collar 28th, Newton 29th, Preston 30th, Joe Glass 31st, Donnelly in 32nd, Clark 33rd, Damon 34th, Danny Weir 35th, Bostock 36th, James Pallow 37th, Noel Brown 38th, Brayton Back 39th, Brooks 40th place, and then your last few drivers, Sarek de Slesser 41st, Turf Brewer 42nd, Ludbrook 43rd, and Stube in last and 44th place. And it's wet, very wet. All of the drivers are going to be going through hell, probably. I actually don't know. I mean, it's probably going to be wet tyres, right? I don't think it's dry enough for those slick tyres. I think they'd be very, very brave to choose those in the current conditions that we have.
I'm actually looking through the other live timing software that we have. Looks like no drivers are out there on the racetrack in dry tires, which I think is very much a smart call, considering that the track, I mean, iRacing considers it to be lightly wet, but as we saw with an incident with a driver coming down pit lane at Barcelona about a month ago at this point, even if the track does seem a little bit dry, you still want to handle it like kid gloves, so you don't want to have anything like that happen. Of course, that was a 1-hour race. This is a 30-minute long one, and for these drivers, it is going to be 30 minutes of dancing in the rain, singing in the rain, or crying in the rain if your race ends in absolute disaster. You gotta see some drivers trying to tackle this race with as much aggression as they possibly can. Other ones are going to be trying to take it a little bit easy. The real thing is, which strategy is going to be the one that is the most successful for these drivers. Hoping for a slightly less disorganized start than we had for race 1. Waiting for those drivers to gun it. They're gunning it now, and it's a very good start for our pole sitters. The green flag's that, and the drivers are on their way. Darren Sharple's in that 277 McLaren.
Off they all go.
Into turn number 1. Looking at some drivers. Oh my God, you can see them running off the track, trying to find any sort of way to get around this race circuit. Gotta say, Elias De Vries has gone off to a flying start. He's now starting a battle with Darren Sharples. Looking at these drivers, though, skidding around the racetrack like it's going out of style. They're struggling for grip. They're struggling in these wet conditions. Hang down, though, into turn number 3. Look at that. That's a bold move from Elias De Vries, trying to retake the lead of this race from Darren Sharples. Sharples, the pole sitter. Elias De Vries started this race in 3rd, but Sharple's going to lose down the lead as De Vries gets the job done in that 213 Audi. We were mentioning earlier on in the show, Aaron, about that Audi and how it may not be the best car in the world of GT3 racing on iRacing. but it's looking pretty good for De Vries as he leads this race halfway through the first lap of the race. Looking at Tristan Dennebrega, though, who's really made no inroads at this early point. He's running in the 12th position. However, considering the wet conditions that we find ourselves in, it may be nice to keep it clean, but he's not going to do that. Banging doors, heading down into turn number 6. Dennebrega wheeling that car around the racetrack like it's going out of style, breaking the elbows out. I was just going to mention how in conditions like this, it may be the smart call to play it a little bit cautious and play it a little bit safe, especially considering the race 2s that he's had throughout this season. But no, he just threw all caution to the wind, made a 3 wide hang down into turn number 6, and I think he should be thanking his lucky stars that didn't end in an absolute disaster.
I think that's an understatement, to be honest. I don't understand why everyone has chosen why now is the time to be aggressive, as that's Gattuso who's come into the pits. I'm not sure why he's done that. Maybe a different choice of tyres potentially for Gattuso, I'm not sure. But choosing to come into the pit lane is the Italian, and is it a drive-through for him already? That would be a shock. I wonder, how has he done that?
Yeah, because I believe it's 17 incident points that these drivers have to hit before they incur a drive-through penalty in this series.
Might have overtaken before the line.
Oh my God, look at this! 3 wide heading down into turn number 3. Contact being made. Ruben Behrings getting into the back of Luke Lucchesi as Van Gortel just went for the dive of a lifetime. Holy cow. Right as I was about to mention the fact that if Stefano Gattuso picked up 17 incident points in the span of 1 lap, I would quite honestly be impressed. These drivers throwing a wrench in the works and trying to play me like a fiddle. Looking at some drivers playing the racetracks and playing their competitors like a fiddle. Here's Victor Van Ziest in the 126 MJK Sim Racing Porsche. He's running in the 6th position as it stands at the moment in the Premier category, which is, I believe, one of the closest classes that we have at this point outside of the leaders in Elite. Gotta say, the Vries gang off to a flyer in that Audi, taking the lead hang down into turn number 3 at the very beginning of lap 1. He's now extended that gap to himself and Darren Sharples to about 1.5 seconds. So it's looking like the Dutchman De Vries trying to pull away. I mean, occasionally in Holland it can rain a little bit, so maybe usually think of British drivers when it comes to rain maestros, but looking like the Dutchman tried to put on a good show. Oh, it was a spin farther in the back.
Oh,
that's a
that's
BMW.
Hoyland.
That's Hoyland going around from
And
the lead in the Premier category, and Odin spinning in sympathy as well. May have been some contact between those two. That's another spinner going off the circuit. Who is that? That's another Ferrari. That right there is Joe Glass in the 110 car. So another Premier driver having a moment coming out of the final corner. 3 spins in the span of a couple of seconds. And I was about to mention some more about that, but Luke Van Gortel now going side by side with Ruben Behrings heading down the start-finish straightaway. Heading down the main straightaway, I should say, down into turn number 3. Got some lap traffic to deal with as well. Looking at this, though, side by side, these drivers are dealing with They're playing with fire.
Yeah, and like I said earlier on, I don't know why during the wet race do they all choose to go balls to the walls, but I mean, it's a great spectacle, so I'm not complaining whatsoever, as it's been a fantastic race to watch so far, and well, we're nowhere near done. We're only 4.5 minutes into it. Don't worry, we've got another 25.5 to go, as that's banging doors between Van Gortel and Lucchesi, the 2 men that were racing for the lead of the race last time out, only what, 10 15 minutes ago. Then oh, that's a spinner up ahead. That's Dean Powell in the Mercedes. I thought that was Danny Lee for a second, but on the entry into turn 7 he went for a loop-de-loop, managed to get back on the track safely though. And by the way, Lucchesi did manage to get ahead of Van Gortel. And here's a replay of what happened to Dean Powell. He was running so well in, I believe this is 3rd place. Oh. And completely lost it under braking there.
Yeah, that was a very odd-looking snap of oversteer hang down into turn number 7. That's another spin. That's Darren Sharples, the pole sitter from this race, going around, coming out of the final corner. Another spinner coming out of turn number 10.
Got a flick.
I mean, we're 4 laps into this race. This is a very bad position to be stopped.
Oh, Darren
Sharples, and look at that is why a pileup coming out of turn number 10. That's 4 cars stopped there. Looking at some of the drivers that have gone away from that incident without any further incident. Look at that, a rejoin for one of the Lamborghinis. Man. Looking at the cars scattering around the racetrack. That was Sergio Slesser in Lamborghini, another spinner coming out of turn number 10. So much stuff going on, we can barely keep tabs on all of it. It is pure insanity at this point. This is one of the drivers that got away from that absolute pandemonium. This is one of the drivers that was involved in that pandemonium. That's Jeffrey Dahman in that number 44 DDK by Eagle Speed Academy car. So he was one of the cars involved in that major schmozzle coming out of turn number 10. You can see he's missing a front bumper as well, so some pretty big contact for him to lose out on a little bit of body work, which is probably going to find itself for sale on eBay by the end of this race. Now, looking like turn number 10 is going to be the trouble spot. I'm curious, Josh, could possibly find a replay to see what may have happened there heading through that section, which is looking like the trouble spot to end all trouble spots in this race.
Well, the problem with this track is in the dry, you want to use all of the curbs as much as possible. And as, well, many of us racing drivers know, you want to avoid curbs as much as possible. I mean, look at the loss in grip. As soon as Robbie McKee touches those inside and outside curbs, going for a spin at that final corner. And that's the problem with that last sector is, you know, like I said, in the dry, you need to use all of those curbs all of the time. And in the dry, you just can't, because there is no grip on them whatsoever, and you will spin, you will aquaplane off, and there's nothing you can do. You have to stick to the inside part of that corner, then kind of cut to the outside and avoid the curbs. And here's how Lucchesi got past Van Gortel. We were running on board with it until Dean Powell decided he didn't want to stay on the track anymore, as Van Gortel then managed to get past Lucchesi there. Very good battling between these two, and they've been fairly evenly matched, at least in the wet so far, as I think we just cut off just as someone spun at turn 10 again. So, like Ron said, that seems to be one of the action corners, and we'll keep an eye on that one for the rest of this race. And yeah, that final sector as a whole proving difficult for a lot of these guys, and I don't imagine many of them have raced around this track in the wet, let alone in these GT3 cars. That's Martin Koch going a bit deep, as Gattuso as well, nearly running into the back of him. And I'd just like to mention as well, De Vries was way out in the lead, nearly 2 seconds, and has rather pulled back on these last few laps, has maybe taken it a bit easy, seeing what's happened to his fellow competitors, as Brayton Back is right on the back of him now, as Darren Sharples, pole sitter for this race, of course, one of the victims of turn 10, and that's contact with a Mercedes, and that was Dennis Collar, who's just been spun round by Darren Sharples, and I think they were both trying to go on the same line there for the maximum amount of grip coming out that corner, and both just forgot that each other were there.
I gotta take a look at a replay of this messy incident coming out of turn number 4. We've seen it happen in real life in the past, and we just saw it happen in the sim. 2 drivers trying to race on the exact same piece of asphalt, and that's the sort of stuff that happens. Sharples, gotta say, honestly, as much as it was a messy incident, Kohler kind of running out there as if Sharples wasn't really there, and Sharples kind of trying to keep it a little bit tight coming out of the corner as if Kohler wasn't really there. It's just a messy incident all around. Both of the drivers really contributing to that. So tough for them to have that incident kind of taking them out of contention in this race. But 2 drivers that are very much in contention to win this race. Following Luke Van Gortel, the race winner in race 1, he's battling hard with Danny Lee, who, despite the fact that Mercedes in the dry is difficult to drive around in this racetrack, he's putting on a brilliant show in the wet in that Mercedes. He's even run the curb as well. So Danny Lee, who should be mentioned. Oh, as that's a spin for De Vries from the lead of the race. That is Elias De Vries going around in that Audi. He had such a good race going for him, but sadly a small little mistake that is going to careen him way down the running order. He's probably going to be completely outside of the top 10 as a result of that, if not just barely in it. But that's a tough moment for him. That gives the lead of the race to the Porsche of Jean Brainback. However, getting back to the point that I was going to mention with the 2 drivers who were running 3rd and 4th, now running 2nd and 3rd, Danny Lee in that Mercedes, he made his series debut at the rain-soaked Barcelona race a couple of weeks ago, so he's no stranger to these conditions. However, he finds himself in a close battle, looking at this with himself and Van Gortel, and looking at that McLaren coming out of the pits of Rob McKee, kind of shoving Daniel Lee in front of Van Gortel in that Porsche. Looking at that, though, that was some close quarters stuff. some just edge of the seat action. Heart pumping stuff. These drivers, their hearts are skipping a beat. Looking at this from Gortel, trying to make a move done around the outside, making hay while the sun is shining despite the fact it's raining. He's still trying to get it done though around the outside through turn number 3, and he's going to get it done successfully. Well done from Luke Van Gortel.
Yeah, that was an incredible move from Gortel. He was so far behind. And just keep it on the road, Van Gortel. I mean, Van Gortel has been incredible so far this race. He has been rapid in that Porsche. And I can imagine the fact that the traction on the Porsche is so good is very much helping him in the rain today. As Brett Behrings and Denner Brager going wheel to wheel, that's Brett Behrings actually getting past Denner Brager. Denner Brager really has not had the best time in this race so far. And it's not an incident or anything. He's just struggling for grip. That McLaren does not look comfortable in the wet at all. And it just looks like the Porsche, I mean, if it didn't have an advantage already, it definitely has one now in the wet. And most of the Porsches in this race so far have done incredibly well, as, by the way, De Vries is falling down the order. And, well, his race has gone from bad to worse. It could have been a first victory for De Vries if he could have kept it on the road, but just couldn't these last few laps. And that might have been a tap from one of the Lamborghinis behind, but it kind of looked like he was just limited on traction as well. We'll take a look as we're coming through turn 7. Was it a tap from a Lamborghini? I think it was. Yeah, it was. Yeah. That was a slight tap and sent De Vries round.
Yeah, slight nudge heading through one of the most trickiest sections around this racetrack. That's going to send Elias De Vries down pit lane. It's tough for him on a pit lane overshoot as well, just rubbing salt into the wounds. It was such a good race. He had a fantastic race going. However, things have just completely fallen apart. Even though we haven't hit the halfway mark of this second of two 30-minute long races, it's not going to be a good result for him in the slightest. Looking at some battling, though, involving the 7th place runner in the Premier category of Chris Jennings in the Axis Sim Sports car. He's got a battle on his hands with himself and Kostrick running a little bit farther up the road, and look right behind. That's a fight going on. I believe that may have been Stefano Gattuso in the... Actually, no, that was Andrew Fairley and Gareth Noon battling. So two drivers in Lamborghinis trading blows right behind. And that was a pretty close fight between those two drivers that get away with it fairly scot-free. Those drivers running at the moment, Fairley running 11th in the Elite category, and Gareth Newton running 2nd in the Evo class as it stands at the moment. The Evo leader, by the way, Francois Brandet, showing the pace that he did in the first race. Oh, has Lucchesi gone off the track?
Yep. He has somewhere, and that is a big blow. So the man who was way up on his teammate and could potentially see him just getting even with Denner Brager has had an incident somewhere. This was with Ruben Behrings. Has he touched the curb somewhere? Oh, no.
Oh, that was contact.
Ruben,
he got another kind of touch.
Oh, that's a big
You
whack.
can see hit into the wall. Looked like that the bumper of magic popping back onto Luke Lucchesi's car. I think the iRacing guys kind of doing him a little bit of a well-done service. Looking at that battling, though.
Yeah.
Was that Ruben Behrings or
glue.
Bert's Behrings that he made contact
I think that
with?
was...
See that
actually,
contact?
I think it was Ruben.
I'm trying to figure out. It may have possibly been Ruben. So two elite drivers coming to blows heading through that corner there. You can see, yes, it is Ruben in that 251 Porsche.
iRacing
see that
glue.
contact being made, and at that point in time, it is game, set, match. Tough for Lucchesi. We were thinking between those two RDSA esports drivers, which one was going to get struck by the falling anvil. Technically, it is kind of both of them, because Denner Brager is running 5th at the moment. However, Lucchesi having that moment, dropping him down to 9th overall. That's going to sting a lot for that driver.
Yeah, definitely. And now he's got damage as well to carry through the rest of this race. I don't think it's too much, but it will be enough to just put him off slightly, and maybe he might just be lacking a bit of confidence throughout the rest of this race. And I wouldn't necessarily put the blame on Ruben or Lucchesi there. This is what happens in iRacing. Sometimes the front bumper and rear bumper kind of meet, on a driver, and they get stuck together, and there's nothing you can do. And that wouldn't happen in real life, of course, because cars aren't made of glue or Gorilla Tape or adhesive. They're just made of metal. So I don't know what's gone wrong in the iRacing physics when that happens. But either way, as that is Francois Brandet nearly missing turn 1 and deciding to go on the Österreich ring, but luckily managed to keep it on the track and is still leading the Evo class by quite some margin, admittedly, by 6 seconds. As Behrens as well, leading the Premier class by quite some margin, 7 seconds. And Van Gortel leading the Elite class by not as big as a margin, but he's gone from all the way 11th all the way up to 1st in the matter of moments, and looks to be pulling away from Breitenbach all the time. And this could be a big statement from Van Gortel for the rest of the season. He's been brilliant today.
Yeah, Luc Van Gortel has put on a brilliant drive, up 10 spots from where he started in this second race. This has been a brilliant drive for the Dutchman. You could call him a mutter, so to speak. He is like a horse that does best in the rain. He's putting on a brilliant drive at this point, and he's a driver who really needs a brilliant drive at this point in this season. He's been up and down. He has been incredibly up and down throughout this season. Entered this race 10th in the point standings with a best finish of 2nd in race 2 at Indianapolis. Outside of that, though, we had finishes of 5th. Well, 2 finishes of 5th, a 9th place run at the 4th race of the season at Barcelona, and a DNF for just the last race of the season at Montreal. But despite that, Luc Van Gortel kicking on the Hyperjets at this point. This has been a brilliant drive for him. May not have been the win in the first race. It could be a win in the second one. However, he doesn't want to have moments like that hang down into turn number 3. Running incredibly deep, nearly driving into Switzerland as a result, and nearly giving up the lead to Jean Brainback, who's still close to him, it should be noted. 1.8 seconds. However, despite the fact that Van Gortel finds himself in a good position leading this race with only about 12 minutes left, I have my eyes a little bit farther back in that elite category, Aaron. I have a good feeling about Danny Lee. I don't know what it is. He's shown some pace in the rain in the past. Finished 2nd in his series debut in a heavily rain-soaked race at Barcelona. But here at this racetrack with these conditions, which are not ideal in the slightest, as you can see, we got spray out there. The track is wet, and the track temperature as well, only 63 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is, these tires have to be clammy at best. So at this point in time, Danny Lee, I actually, as I say that, I think he's just lost out on the final podium position to Ruben Behrens. So maybe my prediction that Danny Lee may be a driver we need to keep our eyes on, eyes out on throughout the end of this race. Maybe that'll just age like milk, but I still have a good feeling about Danny Lee. As I say that, that's the moment that cost him P3 as he gets sideways through 7 and loses it to Ruben Behrens. Beautiful prediction.
Yeah, amazing prediction, in fact. You have a good feeling about him, and then he drops down the field. So that's just how it goes, usually. And Breck Behrens now coming under pressure from Luke King, as they don't need to be getting that close. They're not fighting in class. I think Breck might probably want to let this one go, as Kostic has fallen victim to turn 10. Not the first driver, and not the last, as he chooses to drive straight into the Armco barrier for some unknown reason, and has caused himself probably more damage. And even on that inside curb, you can see just how bad it is, and then loops it completely around that last corner. And unfortunately ends up in the wall and drops a huge amount of places. And I don't think the damage is too bad, but he can carry on. But oh no, something just happened to Breck Behrens. I think something might have done. He did lose the place to Luke King. So I'm not sure what happened there, as he momentarily went off track, trying to defend his position from Luke King. What happened between these two? I did say it would probably be smart for Ruben to let him pass. So this is Ruben, not Brecht, as that's a bit deep, and just about manages to keep it on the track. And that's what a lot of drivers have done in this wet condition race, is they don't know where to brake. And I don't blame them. I would not know where to brake either. These conditions are very unpredictable. And I think I mentioned this earlier, I don't think many of these drivers have been practicing wet weather around this track.
Yeah, I have a feeling that these drivers are usually thinking, may as well just do like a couple laps of practice in the rain, but not too much else outside that. Gotta say, one thing that's a little bit off about this season compared to seasons in the past for the Evolution Sim Racing GT3 Championship, open setups for these drivers to worry about, so maybe practicing in the rain would do see some of these drivers a little bit more benefit than disadvantage, but nevertheless, I mean, if they're not going to practice, some of the drivers who have are certainly going to be the ones to benefit from it. Looking at a beneficiary of a fight between these two drivers, it may end up being Van Ziest. He's on the outside line, going to carry a boatload of speed coming out of the corner, and he books it coming out of turn number 3 to take P2 in that premier category. Brecht Bearings is well farther up the road, so I'm not really sure if this is going to be anything more than second for Victor Van Ziest, who had a pretty rough start to this race meeting after an incident during race 1. However, this second race has gone pretty good for him. Currently finds himself in P2. And taking a look at another Porsche, one of his teammates, this one being in the Evo category. This right here is Roald Turfgroyer. We saw go off the track. He goes off the track now, heading down into turn number 4. Saw him involved in an incident during that during that first race, but here in the second race, he's put on a pretty good show despite the fact he just lost out on P2 to Gareth Noon with that off-track excursion heading down into turn number 4. As we're going to take a look at a replay to see what happens to Luke King, the Alpha 1 esports driver, heading through the middle sector off into turn number 6, and just loses.
Hey! That was a jump scare of a spin there, completely caught him off guard, but managed to keep it on the road, albeit just about. Lost 2 places because of that, and now Lucchesi slowly gaining ground once again, and is actually not too far behind Dennebrega now. As well, speaking of Dennebrega, he's not been too quick this race. I think I mentioned it before, but he really has struggled in these wet weather conditions and is just not comfortable at all in that McLaren. In this, I just heard someone spin, and I think Ron, you did as well. I think that was Thomas Pugh, who's just gone for a huge spin, and he's managed to get back on. But yeah, we just cut the cameras and just heard the classic iRacing screeching tyre noise, as that's one of the Porsches. That's Turf Crew going for a move behind on Martin Koch. As Turf Crew has had, I mean, we saw he had an incident not too long ago, but he's up 21 places. And considering he had that incident in the first race, knocking him, well, pretty much to last, he's going fairly well. And is looking for another one up the inside of Thomas Pugh, who we saw just made that mistake. And a second place is still on for Turf Crew. I think Brandet is way too far up the road, but it's still on for a second place for Turf Crew, and definitely would be one of the more underrated drives we've seen from any driver today. He's put on a good show so far.
Gotta say, one driver who's not having a good show in the slightest is the driver that's behind Royal Turfgroyer in that Evo category, that being Ashley Brooks, all the way down in 4th. That is just a tough pill to swallow for that McLaren driver. As we've mentioned, the season started off so good for him too. He kicked the season off with a very good run of performances. 3 wins in a row, then a 9th place run, then a win, then 11th, then he finished the last race at Montreal P2 in that Evo category. But this is not looking like it's going to be a productive day for him at all. I believe he finished 2nd in the race earlier. This is going to be a P4 result, and I think Francois Brandet with 2 victories here today, that may actually give him, it may not give him a lead in the Evo Championship. However, he may close up quite a lot leaving this race here at the Red Bull Ring. So Francois Brandet, the Frenchman, doing himself a whole lot of favors here. But looking at a fight involving Scott Kostrick, running in the 10th position at the moment, going side by side with Joe Glass. So 2 McLarens trading paint at the very beginning of this 15th lap of the race. Side by side, battling for the last 2 positions inside the top 10 in the Premier category. running effectively all by themselves as well. So there's a heads-up fight between two Porsches with two completely different teams and two completely different looking race cars as well. But it looks like Joe Glass in that 110 car going to be the one that takes advantage of that position as it stands at the moment. However, we've still got about 4 minutes left to go in this race. That fight is certainly not over.
Just noticed that Van Gortel has just had an off somewhere. He's just lost about 1.5 seconds to Brayton back, and I mean, I was just about to mention that he was going so well. He's the only driver in the entire lobby to get into the 41s this race. And is it going to be at the fabled turn 10? And let's see what happens. Has to be so careful on the throttle there. He knew what was about to happen, and he had to pretty much stamp on the brakes and just glide his way through there to make sure he didn't loop the car around, and did very well to avoid any incident happening, but has lost a big amount of time. But I wouldn't be too worried if I was him. He does look like the quickest driver in the entire field in these conditions. As like I said, only driver in the 41s so far this race, and no one really has come close, to be honest, apart from Brayton back and Bearings, who are within about 3 or 4 tenths of him. He's just been insane. And although in the dry, he was still pretty quick, but probably was about 3rd or 4th quickest driver. In the wet, he's just come alive and is thriving in these conditions, and should be on for a race win if he can keep it on the road, as that was Dean Powell getting very close to Collishaw as he makes his way around the outside and up into 9th place as he tries to make a little bit of a comeback after his mini spin through turn 7. And he could have had a good race as well. I think he was in 3rd or 2nd at one point, and well, like most other drivers in the race today, just one tiny mistake and it cost him massively.
I believe the driver that was running in P2 and P3 was actually his teammate of Danny Lee, but he was still putting on a very good show. So unfortunate that Powell had that mistake heading off into turn number 7 earlier on, because he would have been very close to his teammate and I guess boss as well at Danny Lee Racing. This is Danny Lee in that 271 Mercedes. Just a brilliant drive from both of those drivers in that Merc, considering the adverse conditions. These are incredibly adverse conditions, mind you, on account of the fact that we're running, like 60 degrees or something like that? 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's not a good condition at all to be running, especially in the rain. These tires are certainly freezing, at least in the minds of these iRacers, as they try and chuck these GT3 cars around the racetrack. But looking at a fight involving Gareth Noon in the Suma GP2 Lamborghini, the number 24 car, running second at the moment in the Evo class. However, he's got a hornet's nest of cars right behind him. Looking at dive, though, heading down into the corner. That is some bold and audacious stuff from Thomas Pugh. And look at Roland Torfgroyer in the midst of that as well. Looks like Noon going to get shuffled down a little bit to P3 in that Evo class, but this fight is still not over yet as they head down the straightaway off into turn number 4. Riding on board with Thomas Pugh in that number 216 McLaren. He's not had a great show. He's down 5 positions where he started in this race, but looking to have a good end to it, but he's not going to get it as he spins coming through turn number 4. Pugh with a big mistake and a little bit of contact being made with Road Torfgroyer, but I don't think that is going to change that fight too much. But Pugh with a big and unfortunate mistake heading down into turn 4.
Yeah, that's his second big mistake of today, and it's cost him a few places as well. I don't think it was contact. I think he just, got it all wrong there on the entry.
You can kind of tell.
Turf Crewer. Yeah.
You could kind of tell heading into the corner because he was slowly sawing at the wheel. You could see that car was trying to swap ends on him. That's the thing with a lot of these GT3 cars as well. Sometimes a front end could be a faithful pointer dog. Other times a back end of the race car can pretty much just be like a rabid chihuahua with rabies. So it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, especially in track conditions like this where these drivers are skidding around. And right as I say that, that's a McLaren, I believe, off the track coming out of the final corner. Another moment for him. That's a Jeffrey Dahman in that DDK by Eagle Speed Academy car. So another off-track excursion for the driver of that McLaren. This is the car, I believe, that we saw without a front bumper earlier on, so he must have pit for repairs. Would explain why he's one lap down in class. Would also explain why that front bumper is back on that race car. That or iRacing has worked some of their magic to allow these drivers to fit a front bumper on their race cars perfectly while driving around the racetrack. That'd be pretty cool, picking up debris and you just able to click on body panels as you drive around the racetrack. That would be a very fun dynamic to add into iRacing, but I think we'll talk about more additions to Rain before we talk about that. But Luke Van Gortel is going to be the driver that we talk about from this race, and with a drift coming out of the corner, mega sideways and sliding around the track like it's going out of style. Luke Van Gortel putting on a beautiful drive to take his first checkered flag of the season. The MJK sim racing car wins this race. John Brainback finishes about 4 seconds behind in second. Ruben Bering's going to grab yet another podium from this season, rounding out your podium in third. Going to be Tristan Denabrega being the better of the two RDSA esports drivers. However, I gotta say, credit where credit's due to Luke Lucchesi, who finishes right behind in sixth. So damage limitation from Lucchesi for sure after that incident we saw him involved in the earlier stages of this race, still finishing right behind his teammates. However, that's not going to help him out a whole lot in that championship fight. Here's Francois Brandet taking a dominant victory in the Evo category. We just saw Brecht Behrings win in the Evo class, so well done to the Behrings brothers for a double podium, 1 win and a third in the 2 classes that they were in respectively. But I think any sort of preconceived notions we had heading into that second race, Aaron, got thrown away the second that we saw some rain. But even with that being said, I think this race was still a Red Bull Ring race at heart. We saw the same stuff that we'd probably see in a dry, if not cranked up a teeny tiny bit, and some other stuff raced away. But overall, still a pretty fun show.
Yeah, that was very, very entertaining. A lot of messiness and really showing driver skill and determination in that race, as Van Gortel for some reason turned into prime Ayrton Senna during that race. His quickest lap was nearly a second quicker than anyone else in the entire field. I think Ruben Behrings got close to it on that last lap, but before then, no one was close to Van Gortel. Absolutely no one. And yeah, he's just an absolute amazing performance by him in this second race especially. And yeah, he can hold his head up high, and maybe this can give him a bit of momentum, bit of confidence heading into the next few rounds. And like you said, Ron, we're halfway through this season, so still a lot to play for left in these next few rounds.
That it certainly will be. We still got a whole bunch of racing action to keep our eyes peeled for. It's been a brilliant season thus far, and it is going to be a brilliant end to this season with some championship fights that we need to keep our eyes on. I think we'll briefly touch on the results here when everything is said and done from this race at the Red Bull Ring. When everything is said and done from race 2, the Dutchman Luke Van Gortel ends up victorious. 3.8 seconds was the eventual gap between himself and John Brainback in P2. Ruben Behrings going to round out your podium in third. Daniel Lee with a very good drive going to finish in fourth. Tristan Denabrega with a nice drive in his own regard as well, going to finish this race in fifth. Brecht Behrings actually going to split the two RDSA esports teammates, as right behind Behrings is going to be Luke Lucchesi. So Lucchesi falling victim to an incident earlier on, not really of his own fruition, but still nevertheless, he is the one that gets struck by that falling anvil. He ends up in 7th when everything is said and done. Luke King going to finish in 8th, Dean Powell in 9th, Paul Kolashal going to round out your top 10. Looking through the rest of the finishers that we have in this race, we'll also touch on, I think probably the rest of the drivers inside the top 10. Rest of the drivers inside the top 20, mind you, really touch on the other contenders in the Evo category, because that was a pretty good class to follow as well. And once again, Francois Brandet being very dominant in that race. Victor Van Zies having a tale of two halves. He ends up 11th in the second race. Andrew Fairley, I will not repeat the pun that you said earlier on, Aaron, which may actually get clipped because of my incredibly odd and possibly very disturbing fake laugh that I responded to that one with. He ends up finishing this race in 12th. Joe Sparra going to finish in 13th. Alex Fretwell in 14th. Francois Brandet is the Evo winner, finishing 15th. Chris Jennings, Stephen Donnelly, Marcel Brainback, Gareth Noon, and Thomas Pugh going to round out our top 20. We'll briefly run through the results here before we wrap things up on this broadcast of a very exciting day of racing action at the Red Bull Ring. We got a fantastic series of tracks to look forward to throughout the rest of this season. I think as much as it kind of started off, at least Aaron in your book, with a little bit of a sour note running at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway road course, which despite being an IndyCar fan myself, not really a fan of that track personally. We've got some brilliant tracks to bring this season to a close. Watkins Glen in 1 week's time, Fuji, Sebring, and Laguna Seca. This may be a loaded question, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. Of those 4 tracks, which one is probably the one you're looking forward to the most?
Oh, it's a difficult one, mainly because I actually like all 4 of the tracks. I think in terms of racing, it has to be Watkins Glen. I don't think Watkins has ever provided a bad race. It's just always a good time around there. And then I'd probably say Fuji. I do really like Fuji. It's a track I think probably deserves a bit more praise. I understand that it's not everyone's cup of tea, especially that last sector, but I absolutely adore it, to be honest. Sebring, just classic American track. Everyone knows Sebring. It's going to be a good time there. And then Laguna Seca, I think, will be an interesting one. I think that will definitely be more about patience than anything. It's the 2 30-minute races around there, so that should be interesting to watch, to say the least. But just as you were mentioning that, the only 1 hour race we have left is Fuji, so I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah, that's going to be a pretty good one. The final of 4 1-hour races that we have to look forward to. The rest of them going to be those 2 30-minute race formats that we just saw here at the Red Bull Ring. It is going to be a brilliant close to this season in Watkins Glen in 1 week's time. I may be a little bit biased as an American, but I like the fact that we got 3 American racetracks and 3 classic American racetracks as well to keep our eyes on throughout the rest of this season. The GT3 cars mesh well with all of them, so that's going to be a brilliant final few races from this season. The first half has been dramatic. The first half has been exciting, but the second half is going to be nothing to scoff at as well. As for this race, it was a pretty damn good one, if I do say so myself. Had some rain affecting the second one. A hard-fought fight in the first, but it was brilliant to watch from start to finish. And hopefully all of you tuning into this broadcast have enjoyed it as well. But I think I will just about do it from this broadcast tonight. So on Halloween night here in the US, I need to go and hand some kids some Halloween candy here in a couple of moments' time. So with that being said, for myself, Ron Mullins, Aaron Smith joining me in the commentary booth, and Josh Wilkie doing a fine job working all the cameras inside of the virtual production hauler, I say thank you all so very much for watching. Have a great rest of your day, and we hope to see you all wherever it is in the not too distant future.
Are you struggling for consistency in your sim racing? Does your iRating look like a roller coaster? If so, we have good news for you. The way to get more consistent is to first understand what you're doing differently than the professionals. And VRS is the answer. With our competitive subscription, you will have the telemetry, setups, tutorials, and everything else you need to fully analyze your driving. Our data packs and the ability to compare your driving with the best in the world will show you exactly where to adjust your inputs, change your driving line, and shave seconds off of your lap times. And our powerful and precise Direct Force Pro wheelbase and precision pedals are being used by some of the world's best drivers. All these champions agree that VRS hardware is not just the best on the market, it's also priced well below the competition. So if you're looking to upgrade to direct drive and the best pedals in sim racing, VRS is your answer. If you want to get better, get faster, and make it happen sooner rather than later, you owe it to yourself to find out why so many people are switching to VRS. You'll be so glad that you did. Visit www.virtualracingschool.com and learn why the best use VRS.